Now, the UN's humanitarian chief says the tide is turning on the starvation crisis in Gaza as more aid enters the territory in the wake of the ceasefire deal. Tom Fletcher told the BBC the number of malnutrition cases is falling, and on average, the target of around 600 trucks of aid is entering each day, carrying food, medical supplies and fuel. But he warned much more is needed to meet the requirements of the population. He began by giving us an update on what he's seeing on the ground.
I'm in Gaza City right now. I've been visiting hospitals, I've been feeding centres, bakeries, but also talking to a lot of Palestinians here. So much of the Gaza Strip now is a wasteland. It's rubble. And people are picking through the rubble for bodies. They're trying to find their homes. They're returning to where they think their homes were and seeking to identify them. I met a grandmother just now who apologized to me because her home had been destroyed just a week ago and completely flattened. And she was apologizing to me because she couldn't offer me a cup of tea. And, you know, that just demonstrates the dignity and the resolve of so many people here to rebuild, but also the utter devastation. We have an enormous job ahead of us to stabilize the situation, to stop the starvation, to get the hospitals open, to get kids back in school. We've started to do that and we're having an impact already, but being here on the ground, it's an overwhelming task.
Overwhelming. And how easy or how challenging has it been for you to resume or resume your operations there in Gaza City?
It's immensely challenging. I mean, I've driven up and down the roads that we've been clearing over the last few days that were actually impossible to bring our lorries along because they were blocked by rubble and by dead bodies and by the carnage of war. We're making a lot of progress clearing those roads now, including the north-south artery, really, the Al-Saladin road on which we depend so much. This is a huge job. We need to get all the crossings open. We are getting hundreds of trucks in a day now, and thousands of trucks a week. That's a big shift from where we were before President Trump's ceasefire deal, and I was in Sharm el-Sheikh with world leaders as they signed that earlier this week. So there is that upsurge, and we have a 60-day plan. We're trying to get meals to 1 million people every day. I was at a bakery yesterday where we're now, as of yesterday, producing 300,000 pieces of bread a day. We're trying to get the health sector up and running, and I've just come from a hospital that UNICEF are supporting. We're trying to get 700,000 kids back into school and get thousands of tents in every week for what will be a very grim, cold winter. This is a massive job, but we have a plan and we need the international community to come strongly in behind it.
My understanding, according to the ceasefire agreement, is that once the ceasefire began, there would have been an increase in the amount of aid getting into Gaza, some 600 trucks a day, I believe. How much aid is actually getting in? Is that target being met?
Yes, it is. We don't get that number in every day, but on average, over the last few days, we are getting in that sort of number of trucks. About half of what we bring in as the United Nations is food. A lot of it is medical supplies and tents. Fuel has been incredibly important. Part of what we bring in is already making a difference to so many of the projects here that have been without that fuel. Cooking gas. A few days ago, we got cooking gas in for the first time in months, and people here are telling me that's making a difference to their lives. So we are now, as a result of this ceasefire deal, shifting significantly more aid. But we need to go much, much further. We need an avalanche of aid over the weeks ahead. We need to ensure this overwhelming amount of support comes in, that we sustain that attention. And beyond the humanitarian crisis that we're seeking to meet the challenge of, we must also then think about how do we reconstruct Gaza, and how do we rebuild? And ultimately, how do we rebuild hope? Because everyone here tells me that they want to go back to the ruins of their buildings and they want to start again. And they've had enough of this war. They want to start again.
And over the last few months, over the last 2 years, we've seen those shocking images from Gaza, malnourished children, malnourished women. How quickly do you think you'll be able to reduce the hunger levels there in the territory?
So I've just been to one of our nutrition centres, and a week ago, 50% of the cases they were dealing with were malnutrition. Now it's about 30%. So we are turning the tide on the starvation crisis here in Gaza. But we need to do far more. We need to get all those crossings open. We need our NGO partners to be registered to work alongside us. They're an essential part of the delivery of our plan here. We need much, much more aid to come in. We need an outpouring of generosity to fill the pipeline of aid and get our convoys full of food. We need the commercial market to start operating properly again. People here are desperate for eggs, for example. People outside the building here have told me they're desperate for water. We will shift in as much as we can, but we need to do this at massive, massive scale.
That was the UN's humanitarian chief, Tom Fletcher, speaking to us from Gaza City. Well, Israel says the body returned by Hamas overnight has been identified as an Israeli citizen. 75-year-old Eliyahu Margalit was killed when Hamas attacked the Nir Oz kibbutz on October the 7th, and his body was taken to Gaza. A coffin containing his remains was collected by the Red Cross in the southern city of Khan Yunis. The bodies of 18 further hostages are still in the Palestinian territory. This is the scene live now in Hamad city in Gaza, where the search for the bodies of hostages under the rubble is ongoing. Hamas is under growing pressure to return all of the deceased, but claims it's struggling to access their remains. Reports say an international team set up to locate the bodies has entered Gaza and will soon start its work with intelligence provided by Israel. Our Middle East correspondent Hugo Bashega has the latest from Jerusalem.
With this confirmation, Hamas has now returned 10 of the 28 bodies of deceased hostages. Now, the Israeli authorities have been accusing the group of deliberately delaying the return of bodies, saying that Hamas can return several more bodies immediately, and this has caused a lot of anger in Israel. And this is because of the fact that the Israeli authorities had the information that Hamas knew the location of 18 of those 28 bodies. And so far, again, only 10 of those bodies have been transferred. Now, Hamas is saying that it needs heavy equipment to remove some of the bodies believed to be under the rubble of destroyed buildings, and international experts are now expected to join these efforts in Gaza. Now, this dispute has cast a shadow on this ceasefire deal that was brokered with the help of President Trump. This is a deal that also includes a surge in humanitarian aid entering Gaza, and Tom Fletcher, who is the UN humanitarian chief, is saying that aid is now moving into Gaza at scale, with trucks carrying food, medicine, also tents, and he says that the UN is on track to get 1 million meals every day in Gaza. And according to American officials, an average of 500 trucks a day have entered Gaza in the last week. So much needed humanitarian aid entering Gaza for the population there.